Gloria Samuels stepped out of the black Lincoln Navigator, her leather purse clutched tightly in both hands. The valet barely had time to open her door before she emerged, her posture radiating a quiet dignity that needed no labels. Her outfit was simple but impeccable, clean lines, pressed seams, and a white wide-brimmed church hat adorned with a ribbon that matched her polished shoes. It was the kind of hat her late husband, Roland, had always loved, calling it her Sunday crown. Today, though, was no Sunday. It was a Thursday, and the Greenwich Country Club loomed before her under a cloudless sky, its marble steps gleaming with an air of exclusivity that felt both inviting and forbidding. Gloria wasn't here for herself. She was here for her son, Derrick Samuels, the CEO of Samuels Logistics, a company he'd built from a single warehouse in Trenton into a nationwide supply chain empire. Today marked the culmination of over a year of negotiations. $900 million merger with the Hathaway Group, an old money dynasty with roots deep enough to touch the bedrock of American wealth. Derrick had called her the night before, his voice steady but warm. "Ma, it's just lunch. No big speeches, just a toast after the signing. Come for me." She'd agreed, not because she cared about the Hathaways or their marble halls, but because her son had asked, and for Derrick, she'd walk through fire. As she approached the entrance, her heels clicked softly against the stone path. The club was quiet, save for the distant clink of glasses and murmured conversations drifting from the patio. She adjusted her hat, feeling the weight of her own pride, not in the wealth or status of this place, but in her son, who'd risen from their small apartment in Trenton to sit at tables like these. She was halfway up the steps when a woman in a navy blue uniform stepped in front of her, blocking her path with a practiced efficiency. "Excuse me," the woman said, her tone flat, devoid of warmth. "Deliveries and staff use the rear entrance." Gloria paused, tilting her head slightly, as if she hadn't heard correctly. Her purse felt heavier in her hands, but her voice remained calm, measured. "I'm here for lunch with my son, Derrick Samuels." The woman didn't blink. "Yes, well, if you're with staff or catering, it's policy. Rear access is on the left." The words landed like a slap, though Gloria's face betrayed nothing. She'd felt this before, assumptions that clung like damp air, reducing her to a role she didn't occupy. It wasn't new, but it never stopped stinging. She took a slow breath, her eyes steady on the woman's face. "You can check the guest list. My name is Gloria Samuels. My son is one of the owners meeting here today." Before the woman could respond, a sharp voice cut through the air, crystalline and cold, like glass dragged across tile. "Well, I suppose they let anyone in these days," said Victoria Hathaway, her pearls resting heavily against her crisp white blouse. She stood on the patio, a glass of wine in hand, her gaze sweeping over Gloria with a dismissive flick. "Are we letting the cleaning staff dine with us now?" Several heads turned. A man nearby chuckled under his breath, the sound low but sharp enough to pierce. Gloria's hands tightened around her purse, her nails pressing into the leather. She kept her chin high, her expression composed, but inside, something twisted. A familiar ache, the kind that came from being made small in a room full of people who didn't bother to see you. Across the patio, Derrick Samuels had just raised his champagne flute mid-toast when his eyes found his mother. He saw the uniformed woman's rigid posture, the slight tilt of his mother's head, and then Victoria Hathaway's cutting words carried just far enough to reach him. His jaw shifted, the smile he'd worn for the crowd vanishing like smoke. He set the glass down slowly, deliberately, and his colleagues noticed the change. a tightening in his shoulders, a stillness that wasn't there moments before. Bradley Hathaway, the youngest of the Hathaway sons, gave a nervous laugh, leaning toward a colleague. "She's probably joking," he muttered, but Derrick didn't hear him. He was already moving, his steps quick but controlled, cutting through the crowd with a purpose that made people step aside without being asked. Gloria looked up as her son reached her side. His hand found her shoulder, gentle but firm, and his eyes locked onto hers. "You okay, Ma?" he asked, his voice low, searching. She nodded, though her chest felt tight. "I'm fine, baby. I don't want to make a fuss." "I know you don't," he said, his gaze softening for a moment before hardening again as he turned to the uniformed woman. "This is my mother. You just disrespected the most important person in this building." The woman's face flushed, her mouth opening but no words coming out. She stammered, her embarrassment palpable, but Derrick didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His presence was enough 6 feet of quiet authority, his tailored suit doing little to hide the strength of a man who'd once loaded trucks at 3 a.m. to keep his company alive. He turned back to Gloria, guiding her gently toward the SUV parked at the curb. He opened the door himself, ignoring the valet, and helped her inside. She reached for his arm before he could close the door, her voice soft but firm. "Don't ruin your moment over me." He gave her a look, one that carried years of shared struggle and unspoken promises. "You are the moment, Ma." Then he shut the door, his movements steady but his eyes burning with something deeper, a fire that had been kindled long before this day, in places far less polished than the Greenwich Country Club. As the SUV pulled away, Derrick turned back to the marble steps. The crowd on the patio had gone quiet, their eyes following him as he walked back into the dining hall. Inside, the air was heavy with anticipation. A champagne tower gleamed near the windows, and a thick packet of merger documents sat untouched beside a fountain pen, the culmination of months of negotiations. The Hathaway Group's board members, lawyers, and family sat around a long mahogany table, their faces a mix of curiosity and unease. Preston Ward, Hathaway's general counsel, broke the silence, his voice laced with forced calm. "Everything all right, Derrick?" Derrick didn't answer right away. He walked to his chair, placed both hands on its back, and stood there, his gaze sweeping the room. It lingered on Victoria Hathaway, who was still sipping her wine, half earned in her seat, legs crossed, as if the disruption was a minor inconvenience. She looked certain that the deal was locked in, that money would smooth over any ripple. "I want to say something," Derrick said, his voice steady but carrying a weight that made the room freeze. Conversations stopped, glasses stilled. "You all know how much this deal meant, not just for our companies, but for the markets, for the next generation of tech infrastructure in this country. This merger would have changed everything." He paused, letting his words settle, meeting every pair of eyes in the room. "But I'm not signing it." The silence that followed was thick, broken only by a few murmurs of confusion. Victoria's head turned not quickly, but sharply, her lips parting in what was almost a laugh. "Excuse me, excuse you indeed," Derrick said, nodding once. "This isn't a negotiation tactic. There's no more table." Preston cleared his throat, sensing $1 million problem spiraling into $1 billion one. "Derrick, we've invested millions in prep. Both sides. There are legal implications here. Then I'll see you in court," Derrick replied, his tone unbothered. "You can explain to a judge why disrespecting my family was part of your strategy." Victoria leaned forward, her smile tight, not reaching her eyes. Let's not overreact to a simple misunderstanding. I didn't recognize the woman, that's all. Derrick's eyes locked onto hers. That woman is my mother, and you knew what you were doing. You said what you meant. Don't be emotional. Victoria muttered, her voice dripping with condescension. That did it. Derrick leaned forward, folding his hands on the table, his voice low, almost gentle, but cutting like a blade. You think I built this company from a corner office, Victoria? I loaded trucks at 3 a.m. I drove routes when we couldn't afford drivers. I ran payroll from a folding table when we couldn't pay an accountant. My mother took the bus to clean houses so I could keep the lights on in our apartment. So when she shows up here wearing her finest, proud as hell, and you humiliate her, you humiliate me. The room was silent, the kind of silence that follows a storm cloud no one dares name. Derrick stood, his chair scraping softly against the floor. There are deals you lose sleep over. This isn't one of them. He walked out, leaving the packet of papers untouched, the pen still capped, and the champagne tower gleaming uselessly in the sunlight. No handshake, no folder, just the sound of his footsteps fading down the hall. Outside, the world didn't yet know what had happened, but it wouldn't stay quiet for long. By the time Derrick reached his car, his phone was already buzzing texts from his team, a missed call from his cousin Theron, and a voicemail from an unknown number he didn't yet have the energy to check. He drove in silence, the image of his mother's clenched hands burning in his mind. He didn't know it yet, but what he'd just done would ripple far beyond the marble steps of the Greenwich Country Club, shaking boardrooms, headlines, and families from coast to coast. Back inside the Hathaway estate, Victoria sat at the head of a mahogany table in the family's study, her fingers clasped tightly under her chin. Her eldest son, Clinton, paced the room while Bradley scrolled nervously through his phone. Their crisis PR manager, Elena Wynne, was the only one who spoke with ease. "We need to issue a statement," she said, her voice calm but firm, something short, acknowledging the incident, expressing regret, emphasizing shared values. Victoria scoffed, her pearls shifting slightly as she leaned back. What values? That woman looked like she didn't belong. That's not my fault. Elena blinked, her composure faltering for a moment. You just said that out loud in front of your children while I'm here trying to protect your legacy. Clinton stopped pacing, his voice low but sharp. Mom, Derrick's walking away has already tanked interest in our tech sector portfolio. Do you understand how bad this is? He'll come back, Victoria said, her tone confident, dismissive. They always do. Pride fades when the money runs dry. Elena shut her binder with a snap. You don't get it. This isn't about the deal anymore. This is cultural. He struck a chord. Bradley looked up from his phone, his voice quieter than usual. People are calling him a hero, Mom. They're reposting clips of him walking out, quoting him like he's some civil rights icon. Victoria waved a hand, her manicured nails catching the light. They'll forget by next week. Clinton looked at her, his eyes narrowing. They won't. You've become the symbol of elitist racism in every podcast and headline right now. And you haven't even said sorry. I'm not apologizing for having standards. Victoria snapped. Then we're done. Clinton said flatly. You've already cost us one deal. I'm not letting you cost us the entire family business. The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling like dust. Victoria's empire, built on carefully curated polish and control, was wobbling, not because of a failed deal, but because of a single moment on a terrace, a moment she still refused to acknowledge. Meanwhile, Derrick drove through the familiar streets of Trenton, his mother's face still vivid in his mind. He didn't know the full scope of what he'd just set in motion, but he felt it, a shift, a crack in the foundation of everything he'd been building toward. This wasn't just about a deal anymore. It was about legacy, about the weight of dignity, and about the cost of standing still when the world expected you to bend. As he pulled into his mother's driveway, his phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Nia Whitlow, his head of marketing. Social media's blowing up. Small podcast out of Philly just dropped a story about you walking out. It's going viral. Derrick stared at the screen, his thumb hovering over the reply button. He wasn't ready for this, not the attention, not the scrutiny, not the weight of being a symbol. But as he stepped out of the car and saw his mother's silhouette in the window, he knew one thing for certain: he'd made the right choice. And whatever came next, he'd face it the same way he'd faced those marble steps, with a fire that burned steady, fueled by the woman who'd raised him to never bow. Derrick stood in his mother's driveway, the glow from her living room window casting a soft halo across the front porch. The air in Trenton was thick with late summer heat, the kind that clung to your skin and made every breath feel deliberate. His phone buzzed again in his hand, Nia's text still glowing on the screen. Social media's blowing up. Small podcast out of Philly just dropped a story about you walking out. It's going viral. He read it twice, his thumb still hovering, unsure whether to respond or let the moment pass. The world was moving faster than he'd expected, and the weight of it pressed against his chest. Not heavy, not yet, but undeniable. He slipped the phone into his pocket and walked up the steps. Gloria was already at the door, her silhouette framed by the warm light inside. She wore a faded floral housecoat, her hair pulled back, and her eyes carried that quiet knowing she'd always had, the kind that saw through him without effort. "You look like you're carrying the world, baby," she said, stepping aside to let him in. "Not the world, Ma," he said, managing a half smile, "just a piece of it." She didn't press him, just gestured to the kitchen table where a plate of cornbread and a pitcher of iced tea sat waiting. The house smelled of lemon cleaner and the faint sweetness of gardenias from the vase on the counter. Derrick sat, loosening his tie, and for a moment the chaos of the day, the marble steps, Victoria's voice, the untouched merger papers, felt far away. But it wasn't gone. It was waiting, gathering strength like a storm cloud on the horizon. Gloria poured him a glass of tea, her movements slow, deliberate. "You didn't sign those papers," she said, not a question but a statement, her eyes studying him over the rim of her own glass. He shook his head, couldn't, not after what happened. She nodded, setting the pitcher down. "I didn't ask you to do that." "I know," he said, his voice softer now, "but I wasn't raised to let that slide." She smiled, just a flicker, but it was enough to ease the knot in his chest. "You always were stubborn, got that from your daddy." She paused, her fingers tracing the edge of the table. "But this ain't just about me, is it?" Derrick leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight. "It's about everything, Ma. What they think they can say, what they think we'll swallow. I built this company so we'd never have to bend to that again." "And now?" she asked, her voice steady but searching. "Now," he said, exhaling, "I don't know, but I know I'm not going back." The conversation paused as his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from Julian Ricks, his coup. Derrick let it go to voicemail, but the screen lit up with a follow-up text. "Boards freaking out. Investors too. We need to talk. Now." He silenced the phone and set it face down on the table. Gloria watched him, her expression unreadable. "You gonna answer that?" she asked. "Not tonight," he said. "Tonight it's just us." But the world outside wouldn't wait. By morning, the story had broken wide open. The small Philadelphia podcast Nia mentioned had been picked up by Tech Pulse, then Forbes, then Business Today. The headline was everywhere. Black CEO walks away from $900M deal after billionaire family insults his mother. Cable news anchors were already dissecting it, some framing it as a bold stand, others as a reckless gamble. Social media was a wildfire. Clips of Derrick walking out of the Greenwich Country Club circulated on X, TikTok, and YouTube, paired with hashtags like #RespectMatters and #SamuelsStand. A former Hathaway employee posted a story about being told to use the service elevator at a charity gala. A Latinx caterer shared how she'd been asked to remove her apron before entering a front lobby for an event setup. The posts gained thousands of shares in hours, each one a spark adding to the blaze. Derrick didn't see most of it until he arrived at his New York headquarters the next morning. The building was a sleek glass tower, a far cry from the Trenton warehouse where he'd started. But the energy inside was anything but calm. His team was fielding non-stop calls, investors demanding answers, reporters requesting comments, and a surprising number of supporters flooding their inboxes. Warehouse workers, teachers, even retired veterans sent messages. "Thank you for not letting that slide." He walked past the front desk, nodding to the receptionist as he always did, when a reporter outside shouted through the glass doors, "Mr. Samuels, was the Hathaway comment the reason you cancelled?" Another called, "Do you regret walking away from $900 million?" Derrick kept moving, his coffee still warm in his hand, his face betraying nothing. Inside the upstairs conference room, his executive team was waiting. The space was wide, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Market Street, but the air felt heavy, like the room itself was holding its breath. Elliot Trammell, his CFO, spoke first, his voice clipped. "We need to talk about what this means long-term, Derrick, not just this week. 6 months out, we had international infrastructure tied to this merger." "I know," Derrick said, his tone calm but firm. Elliot leaned forward, his glasses catching the light. "We're looking at legal backlash. Hathaway's lawyers are already drafting breach claims, saying you killed the deal for personal reasons." "It wasn't personal," Derrick said, his eyes steady. "It was principle." Julian Ricks, the coup, jumped in, his voice sharper. "Can we afford principle right now? We're barely a Series C company. You think the board's not gonna panic?" Derrick looked at Julian, unblinking. "Let them." The room went quiet, the weight of his words settling like a stone. Nia Whitlow, head of marketing, broke the silence, her tone careful but supportive. "Derrick, I'm with you. I support what you did. But you've got to understand, you're a headline now, a symbol. People are calling you the man who walked away from generational wealth to protect his mother. That comes with heat." "I didn't walk away from wealth," Derrick said, his voice low. "I walked away from being owned." "I get that," Nia said, nodding. "But if you don't take control of the narrative, someone else will. Fast." Elliot added, "We're seeing it already. 2 investors called this morning. They're nervous. They want a plan." Derrick stood and walked to the window, his back to the room. Outside, the city moved as it always did, traffic crawling, a mother holding her child's hand at a crosswalk. He thought of Gloria on those marble steps, how small she'd looked but how tall she'd stood. "I'm not going to teach people that power means swallowing everything," he said finally. "Not here, not in my company, and not for a check." Julian leaned back, frustrated, running a hand over his face. "Okay, but what if we collapse because of this? Then we rebuild," Derrick said, turning to face them. but at least we don't rot from the inside." The silence that followed wasn't agreement, not fully, but it was something else, a shift. Nia nodded first, then Elliot, and finally Julian gave a reluctant shrug. "We'll hold," Elliot said, "for now." They didn't all agree, but the room felt different, like a storm had passed and left something clearer in its wake. Outside, though, the storm was just beginning. By noon, a camera caught Derrick leaving the office, and the clip went viral, him in a grey suit, holding a coffee, nodding to the receptionist like it was just another day. The caption read, "This is the man who said no to $900M for his mother's dignity." That afternoon, Derrick scheduled a press conference. No press kits, no staged backdrop, just a single podium, a folding table, and 20 reporters crammed into a conference room built for 10. He stepped up to the mic, looking tired but steady, his tie loosened just enough to show he wasn't performing. "I didn't cancel the deal because of money," he began, his voice clear, deliberate. "I canceled it because the second you allowed disrespect into the room, it spreads. I wasn't raised that way, and I won't build a future on silence." A woman from CNBC raised her hand. "Is it true Victoria Hathaway made the comment directly?" "Yes," Derrick said, unflinching. "Loud enough for people nearby to hear, loud enough for my mother to feel it." Another reporter chimed in. "Some might say that's not a reason to walk away from a company-defining deal." Derrick nodded slowly. "Depends on what kind of company you're trying to define." The room fell quiet. He didn't speak for long. He didn't need to. "Respect isn't negotiable," he said. "And if we start trading that for contracts, we've already lost." He stepped down, walked out, and left the reporters scrambling to file their stories. By that evening, clips of his speech were everywhere. A former intern posted a video on X, recounting how Derrick had mentored her without cameras or fanfare. A warehouse worker shared a photo of Derrick helping load a truck during a holiday rush. The stories weren't just about the deal. They were about who Derrick was and who he refused to become. The narrative was shifting, and it wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every person who'd ever been made to feel small, every voice told to stay quiet. But behind closed doors, the Hathaways were scrambling. In their Greenwich estate, the family gathered in the study, the air stiff with tension. Victoria sat at the head of the mahogany table, her fingers clasped, her expression unreadable. Clinton paced, Bradley scrolled through his phone, and Elena Wynne, their crisis PR manager, laid out the damage. "The narrative is slipping," she said, her voice calm but urgent. "Derrick's speech is trending. People are digging up old stories about your family. Service elevators, comments at galas. You need to issue an apology, Victoria. Now, I don't apologize to people who overreact." Victoria said, her voice cold, "I didn't know she was his mother. She looked like a mom." Clinton cut in, his voice sharp. "You're not helping. The tech sector portfolio is bleeding. Stockholders are asking questions. Brand analysts are warning about reputation costs. They'll forget." Victoria said, waving a hand, "It's social media outrage. It fades." Bradley looked up, his face pale. "It's not fading, it's building. People are boycotting our events. A museum board just rescinded your honorary seat." Victoria's eyes narrowed, but she didn't flinch. "I'm not apologizing for having standards." Clinton stopped pacing, his voice low, final. "Then you're done. You've cost us one deal. I'm not letting you cost us the entire family business." The room went silent, Victoria's empire trembling under the weight of her own refusal to bend. She didn't respond, but for the first time, her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her wine glass. Meanwhile, Derrick was facing pressure of a different kind. Back in his office, his cousin Theron Ingram, a co-founder, had left a message, "We need to talk, face to face." They met at a diner in West Orange, the same booth where they'd sketched their first business plan on napkins years ago. Theron was already there, coffee in hand, his face tight with frustration. "I heard from Monroe Bank this morning," Theron said, not wasting time. "They're pausing our credit line, the one we were gonna use to scale West Coast operations." Derrick nodded, his expression calm. "I figured they might." Theron stared, his eyes hard. "You figured, Derrick? This wasn't some random buyout. This was our generational leap, our kids' future. I wasn't going to let that future be built on my mother's humiliation," Derrick said, his voice steady. Theron shook his head. "You ever think maybe that was her fight to pick, not yours?" "She wasn't fighting," Derrick said, leaning in. "She was being stepped on." Theron sighed, his shoulders slumping. "This isn't Trenton anymore. You made a decision for all of us without asking, and now people are saying you did it for clout." Derrick's eyes didn't waver. "I did it because I was raised not to sell my name for a seat at someone else's table." Theron sat back, lips tight. "Your lucky folks see you as a hero. You'd better hope that lasts." Derrick stood, tossing a 20 on the table. "If it doesn't, I'll still sleep fine." But deep down, he knew the storm wasn't over. The Hathaways weren't done, and neither was the pressure from his own circle. That night, as he sat in his Jersey City apartment, a voicemail came through from a blocked number. He almost ignored it, but something made him press play. "Mr. Samuels," the voice said, sharp and raspy, like it belonged to someone who'd smoked for decades but recently quit. "I'm not calling for trouble. I'm calling because you need to know what they're trying to do." Derrick sat up, his pulse quickening. "Who is this?" "I worked with the Hathaways for 15 years. Legal acquisition team. You're not the first name they've tried to erase when it didn't suit them. They're preparing a counter-suit, digging into your early filings, your first funding rounds, trying to frame you as unstable, volatile. They want to make you look like you brought politics into business and ruined shareholder value. They're hoping people forget why you walked away." Derrick's jaw tightened. "And why are you telling me?" "Because I've seen this before," the voice said. "They destroy, then deny. You embarrass them in public. They'll try to bury you quietly." The line clicked dead. Derrick sat there, the phone still in his hand, staring out at the city skyline. He'd known the Hathaways played hardball, but this was different. This was war, and it wouldn't stop at his name. They'd aim at his reputation, his team, maybe even his mother if they thought it would hurt him. He called Nia the next morning, relaying the conversation. "They're coming after you," she said, unsurprised. "Victoria doesn't lose quietly. She's going to weaponize your story, make you look like the aggressor." "Let her try," Derrick said, but Nia was already 5 steps ahead. "We need to show people who you are before she tells them who you're not," she said. Within 48 hours, Nia's team launched a media campaign. No slogans, no drama, just stories. Warehouse workers recorded testimonials about Derrick's hands on leadership. Investors spoke about his transparency during tough quarters. Former interns posted videos of how he'd mentored them without fanfare. But the most powerful piece came from Gloria herself, filmed in her small living room, seated in a simple chair, her hands folded in her lap. "I didn't raise my son to be a businessman," she said, looking straight at the camera. "I raised him to be a man who stands when standing means losing something." The video landed like a thunderclap. Cable news played it on loop. Hashtags trended again, #Gloria Samuels, #stand for something. The Hathaway strategy, subtle discrediting, veiled accusations, started to crumble under the weight of authenticity. But they didn't stop. A week later, they released documents suggesting Derrick had violated early partnership clauses in a 2014 deal with Stratus Line Logistics, implying a history of abrupt exits. It backfired. Stratus's CEO, Leonard Greer, went on the record that same day. "Derrick left our deal because he refused to approve wage cuts for our drivers," he said. "I wish I'd done the same." The narrative slipped further from the Hathaway's grasp, each attempt to regain control only magnifying the original wound, one they still refused to acknowledge. Inside their Greenwich estate, Victoria felt the walls closing in. Contracts evaporated. Event invites vanished. Her carefully curated world was cracking, and for the first time, she felt the sting of a spotlight she couldn't control. But for Derrick, the storm was far from over. As he stood in his mother's backyard later that week, watching her clip basil from a small planter box, he felt the weight of what he'd started. The sun was low, casting an orange glow across the grass, and Gloria moved slowly, her faded church dress swaying slightly in the breeze. "You all right with all this attention?" he asked, his voice quiet. She didn't look up, snipping another leaf. "Attention don't bother me, but I know what comes with it." "What do you mean?" She set the bowl down and turned to him, her eyes sharp. "They don't like it when we walk out with our heads high. Makes them feel small, so they try to make you smaller." Derrick nodded, the truth of her words settling deep. He thought of Theron's frustration, the anonymous call, the Hathaway documents. "They're still trying," he said, spinning it like I blew up the deal for nothing. "It wasn't nothing," Gloria said, her voice firm, "and anyone who says that don't know the cost of respect." He sat on the porch steps, and she joined him, the bowl of basil resting on her hip. They sat in silence for a while, the kind that didn't need filling. But as the sky darkened, Derrick knew the next move wasn't just about weathering the storm. It was about building something stronger in its wake. And that would require more than words. It would require a vision, one that could outlast the headlines and carry his mother's dignity into the future. The Trenton evening settled around Derrick and Gloria, the air cooling as the sun dipped below the horizon. The small backyard, with its neatly tended planter box and the faint hum of crickets, felt like a sanctuary, a pocket of calm amidst the storm that had erupted since Derrick walked away from the $900 million deal. He sat on the porch steps beside his mother, her bowl of freshly clipped basil resting on her hip, her hands still but her presence steady, anchoring him as it always had. Her words lingered in the air. It wasn't nothing, and anyone who says that don't know the cost of respect. Derrick's phone buzzed in his pocket, but he didn't reach for it. Not yet. The world could wait a little longer. He looked at Gloria, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the porch light. The lines etched by years of sacrifice and resilience, more pronounced in the dimness. "Ma," he said, his voice low, "I've been thinking about what you said, about legacy, about not handing down silence." She turned to him, her eyes sharp but warm. "You always think too much," she teased, but her smile faded into something more serious. "What's on your mind, baby? I want to start something," he said, the words coming slowly, like he was testing their weight. "Not just a business move, something real. A foundation for workers, drivers, warehouse crews, their families. Health screenings, childcare, tuition stipends, Not just talk, but action, something that lasts. Gloria's mouth curved into a proud smile, though she tried to hide it with a slight tilt of her head. That sounds like you. I want to name it after you, he added, his voice firm but soft. The Gloria Initiative. Her eyes welled, though she masked it with a quick cough. You don't need to do that. I'm just fine without my name on anything. I do, he said, unwavering, because you built me. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his words settling between them. Gloria reached over, resting her hand on his arm, her touch light but grounding. If you're gonna do it, she said, do it right, not for me, but for them, the ones who don't get a seat at those tables. He nodded, the idea taking root, growing clearer with every breath. But before he could say more, his phone buzzed again, insistent. This time he glanced at the screen. A text from Nia. Blocked caller reached out again. Says Hathaway's doubling down. Call me. He exhaled, slipping the phone back into his pocket. Gloria caught the movement, her eyes narrowing slightly. They still coming for you? She asked, trying to. He said, his tone steady but tired. They're digging into old deals, old filings, trying to paint me as unstable, make it look like I'm the problem. She snorted softly, picking up her basil bowl again. Sounds like they're scared. People only dig when they're afraid of what's already above ground. Derrick chuckled, but the weight of her words stayed with him. The Hathaways weren't just fighting for their deal anymore. They were fighting for their name, their legacy, and they weren't going to stop. Not yet. The next morning, Derrick was back in his New York office, the glass tower humming with the quiet energy of a team stretched thin. The media frenzy hadn't slowed. Clips of Gloria's living room video were still trending, and new stories kept surfacing. A driver who'd worked for Samuels Logistics for a decade shared how Derrick had personally covered his daughter's hospital bill during a lean year. A retired teacher from Trenton posted about Derrick tutoring her son in math after school, back when he was still hauling boxes to make ends meet. The narrative was solidifying, and it wasn't the one the Hathaways wanted. But the anonymous caller's warning hung over Derrick like a shadow. He met with Nia and Julian in the upstairs conference room, the city skyline sprawling beyond the windows. The mood was different now. No raised voices, just tired eyes and long exhales. Julian spoke first, leaning back in his chair. We've stabilized, that's the good news. Cash flow's holding, and we're not bleeding clients. Nia nodded, her tablet glowing with analytics. The noise is helping, not hurting. 3 mid-sized logistics firms reached out this morning. Quietly, but they want a partner. They like that we stood for something. Derrick's eyes flicked to her. Because you stood for something. She corrected, her tone firm but warm. He paused, running a hand over his jaw, and now they want me to speak for it. DC Council called. They're building a panel on ethical business practices. They want me to lead it. Julian raised an eyebrow, a rare smile tugging at his lips. That's what comes next, Derrick. You've built the business. Now build the voice. But Derrick looked unsure, his fingers tapping the table. I never wanted to be a symbol, Julian. Symbols are heavy. People worship them or tear them down. Neither feels like a life I want. Nia leaned forward, her voice steady. You don't get to choose that now. You stood up and people saw it. You can't unring that bell. He nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. On the anonymous call, on Theron's frustration, on the letter that had arrived the day before, tucked into a pile of invoices. It was thin, off, white, no return address. Just his name typed cleanly across the center. He hadn't opened it until late last night, when the office was dark and the cleaning crew's hum was the only sound. The letter was handwritten, the cursive neat, every loop deliberate, like the writer had practiced before committing ink to paper. Mr. Samuels, you don't know me, but I know who you are. My father was the groundskeeper at Hathaway Ridge from 1985 until he died in 2009. He raised me and my two sisters on that job, woke up before the sun, never complained, taught us to be proud even when we were invisible. I saw your story on the news and I cried, not because I was surprised by what happened to your mother, because I wasn't, but because for once someone said no and meant it. You reminded me of my father. He never had your platform, but he had your spine. I just wanted you to know not everyone forgets where they came from or who they stand up for. With deep respect, Camille Pierce. Derrick had read it twice, then folded it carefully and set it on his desk. The words had stirred something deep, a connection to a history he hadn't lived but understood in his bones. He'd asked Nia to find Camille quietly. She'd called back that morning, found her, teaches 4th grade in Harrisburg, no social media, lives in a small apartment with a rescue dog. She didn't expect you to write back. I want to visit her, Derrick had said. No press, no cameras. Should I call ahead? Nia asked. No, I'll knock. 2 days later, Derrick stood on a small stoop in Harrisburg, a paper bag of banana bread from a local bakery in his hand. He felt something he rarely did, nervous. He knocked twice, and the door opened to reveal Camille Pierce, mid-40s, brown ponytail, wearing jeans and a school district sweatshirt. She froze when she saw him, her eyes wide. I'm Derrick, he said, offering a small smile. Thought you might be tired of everyone wanting something from you. Brought banana bread. She let out a breathy laugh, stepping aside. Come in before my dog tries to eat you. Inside, the apartment was warm, lived-in, with books stacked on a coffee table and a framed photo on the mantel. An older man in work boots, standing under a tall oak, rake in hand, a quiet pride in his eyes. Derrick walked over, studying it closely. Your father? Camille nodded, pouring tea. He worked that estate like it was his own. I know the type, Derrick said, thinking of his own mother, her hands always busy, her pride unyielding. They sat, and Camille told him about her father, how he refused to call the Hathaways sir or ma'am, how he saved every check, how he taught her to read using contracts and invoices he brought home. He'd have liked you, she said, not because you made it big, but because you knew when to walk away. They spoke for 2 hours, no recordings, no hashtags, just two people connected by a shared history neither had chosen but both carried. When Derrick left, Camille handed him a copy of the photo of her father. For when the world gets loud again, she said. He tucked it into his jacket pocket, the weight of it grounding him as he walked back to his car. But the world was about to get louder still. That evening, as he drove back to Jersey City, a voicemail came through from a nurse at Capital Care Medical Center in Trenton. It was gentle, professional, asking him to call back, no urgency specified. But the words, your mother, and fainted, cut through him like a blade. He didn't wait. He left a meeting mid-sentence, grabbed his keys, and drove the turnpike with his jaw locked tight. When he arrived, Gloria was sitting up in a hospital bed, sipping ginger ale and looking mildly annoyed, like she had better places to be. I told them I just stood too fast, she said as he walked in. Didn't need all this fuss. But Derrick saw it, the fatigue in her eyes, the slight tremble in her hand as she set the cup down. He sat beside her, holding her wrist gently. What did the doctor say? That I need to slow down, take my iron pills, eat more greens, she said, waving a hand. Same thing I tell you. He smiled, but the knot in his chest didn't loosen. Doctor? Maylin entered, young but direct, her voice kind but professional. Your mother's vitals stabilized, but her blood pressure's fluctuating more than we'd like. We'd like to run a cardiac workup. She hasn't had one in a while. Gloria waved it off. I feel fine. Derrick nodded to the doctor. Run the test. Over the next 2 days, the results came in. Nothing dire, but not nothing either. A leaky valve, mild arrhythmia, iron deficiency. Small flags, warnings that life didn't wait forever. That night in Gloria's hospital room, they watched reruns of Sanford and Son, the laugh track filling the silence. Gloria spoke without looking away from the screen. You've done good, baby. He chuckled. You calling me baby in front of the nurse. I brought you into this world, she said, her voice firm but warm. I get to call you baby. He smiled, but it faded. I'm not done yet, Ma. I know, she said, turning to him. But don't wait too long to live. Her words hit differently, like a truth he'd been avoiding. He looked at her, really looked. The deep lines, the quiet strength, the woman who'd become the heart of a national story without ever asking for it. And he knew the Gloria Initiative wasn't just a plan anymore, it was a promise. Weeks later, the initiative launched quietly, no red carpet, no press tour, just a website, a launch video, and partnerships with 3 nonprofits. It offered health screenings for warehouse workers, child care for drivers' families, tuition stipends for their kids. Local news picked it up, then national, and the conversation shifted from confrontation to construction. From calling out broken rooms to building better ones. At the first Community Day event, Derrick stood at a folding table under a white tent, food trucks lining the lot, kids running between face painters and book drives. Workers who'd feared layoffs now stood with their families, eating barbecue, talking about the future. He took the mic briefly, his voice steady. I turned down $900 million. People said I was crazy, but this is worth more than any check. The crowd applauded, warm, real, not thunderous but honest. Later, as the sun set and the lot emptied, Derrick's phone buzzed with a voicemail. He almost ignored it, expecting another reporter or investor. But the voice stopped him cold. Derrick, it's Dwayne. Yeah, I wasn't sure you'd still have this number, but I heard about what you did. With the deal with your mother, I just had to reach out. Dwayne, his father's brother, gone for 20 years, vanished after Roland's funeral, no goodbye, no explanation. Derrick stood in his apartment, keys still in hand, listening as the voice continued, older now, slower. I saw you on the news. Your mama raised you right, no surprise there. I'm proud of you, and I'm sorry for a lot. If you ever want to talk, this is my number. The message ended. Derrick replayed it, his mind swirling. He hadn't thought of Dwayne in years, but the memories came fast. His dad fixing the water heater, Dwayne bringing ribs every 4th of July, then the silence after the funeral, like a door slammed shut. Gloria called the next morning, her voice calm. He called me too, left a message, same as you, I'm guessing. What does he want? Derrick asked, his grip tight on the phone. Maybe nothing, she said. Maybe he's trying to make peace while he still has time. I'm not sure I need peace with him. She was quiet for a moment. Baby, sometimes peace ain't for them, it's for you. That night Derrick called Dwayne back. 3 rings, then a cautious Derrick. Yeah, it's me. A pause, then a small laugh. You sound just like your father. I get that a lot. They talked for 15 minutes about fishing trips, high school football, how Dwayne had followed Derrick's career from afar. I was a coward after your dad passed, Dwayne admitted. You were a mirror. I couldn't look at you without seeing him. I left because it was easier than staying and failing you. I didn't need you to succeed, Derrick said quietly. I just needed you to stay. Dwayne's voice cracked. I know. When they hung up, Derrick didn't feel closure, but he felt lighter, like he'd let go of something he'd carried too long. At a team retreat the next week, he shared the story briefly. Forgiveness isn't approval. He told his staff, "It's refusing to let bitterness take up your space." A young intern caught up to him as he left the venue. "Mr. Samuels," she said, breathless, "my dad always said no one in business sticks to their morals, that it's just about money. You proved him wrong." He smiled, his heart steady. "No, my mother did." As he walked to his car, head high, the weight of the past weeks settled into something new, not a burden, but a foundation. The Hathaway's countersuit fizzled, their narrative drowned out by stories of workers, families, and a man who'd chosen dignity over dollars. Victoria's empire continued to crack, her refusal to apologize a wound that wouldn't heal, but Derrick didn't gloat. He built new partnerships, new plans, and a foundation bearing his mother's name. Legacy, he realized, wasn't what you left behind. It was what you lived through, what you refused to let die in silence. And as the stars emerged over Trenton, Derrick knew he'd carry that truth forward, not just for himself, but for every hand that had held him up, every voice that had spoken when silence would have been easier.
If you liked this story, please like, subscribe, and share it with others so they can learn something from it too.